And I have two quotes first, and I'm going to read them to you because I love these quotes. The first one's by L. Virginia French that says, "Tramp, tramp, to the ghostly tramp, echoed the courtyards dark and damp. Slowly swung as the hinges drape, shrieking folded the iron gate. Sullen sounds from the belfry fell, muffled moans from its brazen bell, and spectres twain have crouched beside the new-made grave of a murdered bride." And the second quote comes from Once Upon a Time in the West. "Merton, tell me, was it necessary for you to tell all of them? I only told you to stare them. Frank, people stare better when they're dying." And here's the story. "On the hottest, dustiest day, in the most forlorn year of our Lord, 1870, the two greatest gunfighters in the world met for the first time in a small barroom in Little Santos, Arizona. The occasion which elicited such a class of man being involved was, of course, a great sum of money. The date of their meeting, in point of fact, marked the 7-year anniversary of the end of the Civil War. Of course, it was nothing to celebrate. The North had won using the world's first biological weapon, and what it meant only to sicken and destroy the Southern forces had quickly turned the entire eastern half of the United States into a zombie-filled graveyard, a land filled with abominations even the devil would have had nightmares about. General agreement was mistakes had been made. One of the men in the barroom, Estes Madru, had arrived early and sat in the back in the deepest shadows, resting his tilt in one hand and a hardly touched whiskey in the other. Most of the other bounty hunters thought he was part of the group doubting the man offering the award, and as such, never seriously looked upon him as a competitor. Hidden away, you could still see he was tall, of sturdy build, and wore tiny glasses that spit back the candle light like cheap firewater. The rest of his character was undrawn. These bandits and tillers would have run in terror of gaped in awe if they'd known half of the truth about the man. The second gentleman of our story was no gentleman. His name was Panther Jackson, and he was impossible to hide in any room, much less one this small. He didn't bother. There was something so odd and wild about Jackson that he stood out wherever he went. He would have had it damned hard as an outlaw. There's no reason to describe a man's pale blue eyes and sandy hair in the wanted posters when they tower above every crowd. The West was prone to tall tales, stories of men as high as houses, as broad as barnsides, men who wrestled bears and rode eagles. People like Jackson were the inspiration for such tales, a way to explain a kind of man that had never been seen before and never would be seen again. And if Estes looks like he had once known a more civilized world, Jackson looked like he might have been raised in a lesser one, and that somewhere amid the jungle attacks and knife fights of South America, he had forged himself, and that he might have enjoyed the process quite a lot. And now I should tell you, the governor of the southern states of Arizona and Texas offers a reward for the bounty hunters to go and try to rescue a jewel in an overturned train tower in Dallas, Texas, where the zombies are known to be. So now we skip ahead to when Estes arrives there. Estes rode over the final rise and pulled his house up, staring at the forlorn ghost that had once been the city of Fort Worth. Estes' posture had the upright carriage barren of eastern boating stools. His tiny glasses peeked out from between the top of his coat and the wild blonde mop of toads other people called hair. He studied the scene like a man locked in a room with both a jigsaw puzzle and an angry cougar. Estes slid off his white horse, a big-boned animal that had once belonged to a New York police officer. Estes grabbed his rifle and balanced the long barrel over the horse's steady withers. He slid on the rotating stoke, his own design, cycling past Night and Stoneview to extreme long distance. The city, which had appeared deserted, lurched to life. The dead, gray-hued and absent-minded, wandered the streets, shuffling amid overturned tarts and dead animal carcasses. He counted 5, 10, before he heard a scream, proof of a living among these dead. A man on horseback galloped up the main street into view, followed by perhaps 30 undead humans. One of these duels was clinging to the horse's back and climbing toward the man, hence the screaming. Estes watched the duel through his stope. The view jumped between horseflesh, man, and monster. The duel dragged the rider, pulling him into a lover's embrace. The rifle shots sounded, sure and powerful. The duel fell away from the man into laps, silent to the dusty ground. Estes released his finger from the trigger. He still had it, these unasked for stills honed on a long journey through a land that, though once tagged with the general monitor of the United States of America, to now be only rightly filed under the name of hell. The other man was so surprised that he too fell off his horse and onto the ground as the gun sounded. Estes knew then the man was dead. You couldn't make one mistake around them, not and expect to live to reminisce about it later. As the stranger stood up, Estes vaguely recognized him as one of the over-enthusiastic bounty hunters from above, now surrounded by the fate he had so ardently sought. Estes watched, but wasn't tempted to spend any more ammo. He had stopped wasting bullets on fools years ago, somewhere around the Chicago city limits. The man screamed again, then pulled out his gun and fired wildly into the crowd. Only one duel dropped. The rest of the herd acted as if no motion had been made and closed in. Gunshots sounded again, but this time 6 duels fell. Jackson had arrived. Jackson galloped over the rise, blazed past Estes, and continued down into the valley. A 6-shooter in one hand and his small cannon in the other, he guided his paint horse Indian style with his legs, and shot down everything near the man, long before he reached the herd. The other bounty hunter backed away, hit a wall, and edged towards the door of a deserted bar. His gun still raised, he held it on Jackson, as though Lucifer himself had ridden into town. Just then a duel jumped from the deserted bar, biting and clawing deep into the man's throat. The man collapsed, blood splurting all over the ground in a bright arc. The duel then ran full force at Jackson, and Estes dropped the monster with his second shot of the day. Estes disassembled his weapon, and then rode down to join Jackson, who had dismounted, and wandered over to the dead bounty hunter's house. Estes pulled out a Colt as he rode closer. You almost saved him. Jackson leaned down over the body and straightened up, the governor's tea and a fistful of bills in his hand. Tears me up inside. Jackson mounted up. Estes glanced around. Then why the theatrics? Why the big show? Jackson said, hadn't realized there was no show. That what city folks call it, fighting face to face, instead of slinking along the ridgetops like some kind of coyote? Estes smiled. Show, friend, I have no problem with you. Just curious, that's all. Jackson nodded. Got a mighty interest in finding that train myself, but I don't even see the tracks. Estes said, that's because it's the north-south line. I figure the trash is south of town. Jackson looked at Estes as though for the first time. You Californian? A rich man playing at a poor man's dame? No, on both accounts. I'm from the east. Jackson reloaded his weapons before he bothered answering. I reckon that would be true if we were standing in the middle of a snowstorm, and hell, about as likely. Estes said, well, that certainly isn't the weather. Wouldn't be so certain about the location. I hope we don't have a problem between us. I don't fancy tilling anything that still draws breath. Jackson laughed. Then you're in the wrong line of work, in the wrong country, at the wrong time, in the wrong goddamn universe. But I'll give you an hour's head start to that train, just to show you there's no hard feelings. Estes nodded. Just enough time for me to kill some dead and get murdered myself. Is that your reckoning? That would make sense, yes. Estes mounted up and holstered his weapon. Free piece of advice. Stop laying wage on me dying or going home. Those odds are longer than the road from New York City, my friend.